So, I want to start today by looking at a snapshot in time. It's 1991. We're looking at the political landscape of the United States, and honestly, it looks kind of boring, or at least decided.
Right.
You've got President George H.W. Bush. The Cold War is effectively over. I mean, the U.S. won. You have Operation Desert Storm, a huge military success,
Yeah.
and the president's approval rating is sitting at 90%.
Which is just astronomical. You almost never see numbers like that in modern polling. It wasn't just popularity. It was, perceived invincibility.
Exactly. If you were a betting person in 1991, you wouldn't just bet on Bush winning re-election. It was going to be a coronation. And yet, just 12 months later, the floor completely falls out. Bush doesn't just lose. He gets crushed in a way that completely rewrites the American political map.
That's the key right there. It wasn't just a loss for an incumbent. That period from 91 to 92, it's like a fundamental shift in the tectonic plates of U.S. politics.
Yep.
We went from one era, the era of the Republican lock, to the one we're basically still living in.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We've got a stack of sources here, including a great slide deck on realignment elections and a really detailed doc on the 92 campaign itself.
Right.
And the mission is to figure out how an obscure governor from a small state managed to, as one of our sources puts it, pick the lock of the Electoral College.
Picking the lock. That's the phrase James Carville used, and it's the perfect metaphor. But to understand how impressive that was, you first have to understand what that lock even was.
Yeah.
Because looking back now, from, our perspective today, the political map of the 1980s, it looks like science fiction.
I was looking at the maps in the source material, and you're so right, it's completely disorienting. We're used to red states and blue states being pretty fixed. But from 1968 to 1988, the Republicans had a complete stranglehold on the presidency.
It was a period of just total dominance. In that 20-year span, they won 5 out of 6 presidential elections. The only exception was 76 with Jimmy Carter.
And the sources framed Carter as like a total fluke.
Right. Exactly. The analysis here suggests Carter only won because of the specific fallout from Watergate. Without that massive scandal, the theory is the Republicans would have just swept the board for 2 straight decades. That's a Republican lock.
Okay, but let's talk about the geography of that lock, because this is where it gets really weird for a modern listener. When we think of the Republican base today, it's the South, the rural Midwest. But in the 80s, their power centers were completely different.
It was a whole different coalition. I mean, yes, they had the South, which was shifting their way, but the real pillars of the Republican Party were New England and the West Coast.
The West Coast, you mean like California?
California, absolutely, but also Oregon, Washington. And then you look at the Northeast, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, Delaware. These weren't swing states.
No.
They were reliable Republican strongholds. Our source points out that states like Illinois and California voted Republican in every single election, or 5 out of 6 during that whole era.
That is just wild to think about. Vermont as a GOP stronghold. It implies that the whole definition of what a Republican was must have been different.
It was. This was the party of, Main Street moderation. The voters in the suburbs of Connecticut or on the California coast, they were fiscally conservative, pro-business, but they weren't fighting the culture wars we see today.
Right. They wanted stability, economic management.
Exactly. And the perception among analysts at the time was that this coalition, the South plus the West plus the wealthy Northeast, was just unbreakable.
Mathematically, it seems impossible for a Democrat to win. I mean, if you start with California, Illinois, and New Jersey already in the Republican column, the math is basically over.
That's what all the pundits thought. They believed the Electoral College had a structural bias that guaranteed a GOP presidency basically forever.
So we have this lock. We have a president with 90% approval. It's 1991. What happens? How does the wheel come off so fast?
Well, gravity kicks in, or I guess more specifically, economic gravity. The sources point to a few things, like the broken read my lips tax pledge.
But the absolute #1 driver was the economy.
It's the economy, stupid.
We'll get to Carville's famous sign, yes. But we have to unpack why the economy hurt Bush so badly. Because, statistically, the recession of the early 90s, it wasn't the Great Depression, but the type of recession was what mattered.
The source uses a really specific term here I want to drill into. It calls it a structural downsizing of American capitalism.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot more ominous than just a downturn.
It is more ominous. In previous recessions, in the 70s or early 80s, the pattern was cyclical. Business slows down, factories idle, workers get laid off.
But they come back.
But when the economy picks up, the factory turns back on and the workers come back. It's painful, but it feels temporary.
Okay, so what made 91 different?
91 was really the start of the white-collar recession.
Yeah.
This structural downsizing meant companies weren't just pausing, they were reorganizing. They were eliminating entire layers of middle management. They were closing plants for good. So if you lost your job, you weren't just waiting for a callback. The job itself, it didn't exist anymore.
Precisely. And this created a profound anxiety in the middle class that the sources all highlight as the decisive factor. It wasn't just times are tight right now. It was, is my future secure? Will my kids do as well as I did?
There's a stat in the notes here that really drives this home. It says average real family income eroded under Bush, and that growth was lower in his term than in any presidential term in the previous 60 years.
I mean, that is just a devastating metric for an incumbent. You can have all the foreign policy wins in the world, but if people feel poorer and less secure than they did 4 years ago, you are in deep, deep trouble.
And speaking of foreign policy, the source makes a really interesting point about the Cold War. You'd think winning it would be a huge asset for Bush. He's the expert, right? The former CIA director.
It was an asset until it wasn't. The irony is that by winning the Cold War, Bush actually made his own expertise less relevant. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the American public kind of took a deep breath and said, okay, we're safe abroad now. What about the problems here at home?
So his greatest strength, foreign policy, suddenly became a non-issue.
Exactly. He was a master of a game that had just ended, and he seemed completely disconnected from the new game, which was all about domestic economic anxiety. That opened the lane for a challenger.
But, and this is kind of funny looking back, nobody wanted that lane.
Right.
The Democrats looked at that 90% approval rating in 1991 and just ran for the hills.
It's so true. The heavy hitters, the famous senator, the governors of big states, they all sat it out. They thought 92 was a suicide mission. They figured, let's just wait for 96.
Which left the field open for what the source calls secondary candidates. And out of that field emerges Bill Clinton.
The obscure governor of a small and backward state, as the text rather harshly puts it.
But he had something the others didn't. The source describes him as the Energizer Bunny.
And that really was his defining characteristic as a campaigner. He had this, supernatural stamina. He could shake hands for hours, listen to people, absorb information.
Yeah, the source mentions his high intelligence, his ability to just soak up policy details.
Right. But more than that, he was just a gifted, natural politician who actually loved campaigning.
He also seemed to get that the Democratic Party needed a serious reboot. He wasn't running as an old-school liberal, was he?
No, and this is so crucial for the realignment. Clinton basically dragged the Democratic Party kicking and screaming back to the political center. He looked at the last 3 elections where Democrats just got wiped out and realized they were seen as weak on crime, weak on defense, and obsessed with big government.
So how did he pivot?
He framed the Democrats as the pro-state party, meaning, we believe government can do good things. But he explicitly rejected that big government label. He focused on welfare reform, on being tough on crime, on economic growth. He was trying to reclaim the middle class.
He was trying to solve the problem of the suburbs, those Main Street Republicans we talked about. He wanted to give them permission to vote Democrat.
That's it, exactly. He was saying, you don't have to worry about us being radicals. We just want to fix the economy.
Which brings us to the campaign itself and the famous war room. We had to talk about James Carville in that sign.
It's probably the most famous piece of interior decoration in political history. Carville, who was Clinton's lead strategist, he taped a sign up in the campaign headquarters in Little Rock.
And it wasn't a slogan for the public, right? It was for the staff.
Purely for internal discipline. You have to remember, Clinton was a policy wonk. He could talk for 40 minutes on, agricultural subsidies if you let him. Carville needed to keep the campaign laser-focused.
Okay, so the sign had 3 points. Number 1, more of the same or change.
Which brilliantly frames the election as a choice, not a referendum.
Number 2, the economy. Stupid.
The one everyone remembers. Don't let him talk about the Gulf War. Talk about jobs. Talk about people's wallets.
And number 3, don't forget about healthcare.
And that singular focus just allowed them to hammer Bush exactly where he was weakest. They turned the whole election into a vote of no confidence in the incumbent.
The source has a very poetic line about this. It says the economic failure liquidated the promises and dreams of the 1980s.
Liquidated the promises. That's such a heavy concept. It implies the 80s were this big credit card boom, and now the bill is finally due.
And you can see how voters felt that. They felt the prosperity of the Reagan years was just evaporating. So November comes, the results roll in,
Yeah.
and it's not even close.
No. Bill Clinton wins 370 electoral votes. Bush gets 168. It is a landslide.
It's a blowout. But here's the really fascinating part. Even the people who won didn't seem to fully understand what they had just done.
We're talking about the Carville quote after the election.
Yeah. James Carville is interviewed right after this historic victory, and he says, "We didn't find the key to the electoral lock here. We just picked it."
He thought it was a heist. He thought they just snuck in.
Right. He really believed that the Republican lock was still the natural order of things, and they just managed to slip through because of a unique set of circumstances.
The recession, Ross Perot, a charismatic nominee, he thought it was a one-off.
But the data in our source stack argues the exact opposite. They didn't pick the lock, they broke the door down.
They smashed it. 1992 wasn't an aberration, it was a realignment. It was the year the modern political map was born.
So let's go through this change, because this is the real payload here. What happened to those Republican strongholds?
They just vanished. Look at what became the blue wall. California, Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, all those New England states.
The bedrock of the Republican coalition for 20 years.
And in 1992, they all flipped to Clinton.
And the key here is they didn't flip back.
That's the critical point. If it was just about the recession, you'd expect them to go back to the GOP in 96 or 2000, but they didn't. California has arguably never been competitive for a Republican since. New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, these states became the new base of the Democratic Party.
So why? Why did those specific places flip so permanently?
It goes back to that Main Street Republican identity we discussed. The Republican Party itself was changing. It was moving to the right, becoming more focused on social conservatism, more Southern, more evangelical. And that shift started to alienate the moderate suburban voters in places like Marin County or the suburbs of Philadelphia.
So as the GOP moved right, those voters looked at Clinton's centrist New Democrat platform and said, actually, I'm more comfortable over there.
Exactly. Clinton captured the center, and by doing so, he established a floor for Democrats in the Electoral College.
Explain that concept of the floor.
Okay, so before 1992, the Democrats basically started every election in a huge hole. Since 1992, the Democratic nominee has effectively started with a massive advantage. Our sources point out that even when Democrats lose, like Al Gore in 2000 or Hillary Clinton in 2016, they have never received fewer than 251 electoral votes.
Wow. That is a staggering statistic. So the baseline went from almost impossible to win to almost impossible to get blown out.
Yes. The map completely reset. The Republicans basically traded the coasts for the interior. They locked down the South, but they lost the huge population centers in the Northeast and West for a generation.
There was a short-term anomaly, though, right?
No.
Clinton did win some southern states.
He did. He won Georgia, Louisiana, Tennessee. But the sources note this was really the last hurrah of the old Southern Democrat. He was a Southern governor, so he had local appeal. But it didn't last. By the mid-90s, the South was solidly Republican. The real lasting legacy of 92 was that blue wall in the North and West.
It's just amazing to think about how quickly conventional wisdom can shatter. In 1991, the Republican lock was a fact of life. By the end of 92, it was ancient history.
It really teaches you a lesson about political permanence. I mean, there's no such thing. A lock is only a lock until the environment changes. When you combine economic distress with that candidate who can speak to the anxieties of the moment, the map can change overnight.
And it changes because the electorate itself changes.
Exactly. More diverse, different economic needs, different expectations of government. The promises of the 80s just didn't work for the reality of the 90s.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question that popped up in this slide deck. There's a really provocative thought about how these big shifts actually happen.
I think I know which one you mean. Is it about the silent majority?
That's the one. The slide asks, is the silent majority speaking more significant than the loud minority refusing to be quiet?
It's a great question. We spend so much time listening to the loudest voices, the protests, the pundits, the diehard partisans on both sides. But in 1992, the people who actually decided the election were the quiet ones.
The suburban parents worried about their jobs, the people sitting at the kitchen table looking at their bills.
They didn't make a lot of noise, but they completely overturned the political order. And that's the dynamic to watch in any election. The tectonic plates don't move because of the people shouting on TV. They move because of the quiet shifts happening in millions of households.
A good reminder that in politics, the ground can shift right under your feet when you least expect it. That takes us to the end of this deep dive into the 1992 election.
A truly pivotal moment in history.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.